Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel and welcome to this video. Today I will be showing you my process in a couple of steps of how I sketched, painted and inked this urban scenery with some wisteria flowers. So without further ado, let's get started. First step would obviously be to choose a reference photo. And this one I have chosen from Pinterest. I will link it in the description box if you want to check it out. And after choosing my reference photo, I like to turn it into a grayscale. I'm not bothered with colors and it makes it easier for me to see what's important and what I want to transfer to my sketch. Next to putting it in grayscale, I also like to high up the contrast, because that is the way how you lose the details even more. You are only left with the lightest and darkest parts, making it easier to choose what you want to put on your simplified sketch. Next step would be to do the sketching. And before I start with that, I do like to just draw a grid onto my reference photo. I usually do print out my reference photos or just use an app on my tablet to draw a grid onto it. And this time I will divide my reference photo into 4 parts horizontally and 2 parts vertically. For sketching, I will be using this sketch pad. You can just use basically any paper you have. It will be fine, printing paper or whatever. I do like to sketch on just a regular paper and not directly onto my watercolor paper, because that is, you know how you can ruin your paper, especially if you erase on top of it. And I do want to have a freedom to erase if I make a mistake. I'm also drawing a grid on my sketching paper. And if this is going too fast for you and you want it in a slower pace, I do have step-by-step real-time video on my Patreon page if you want to check that out. I'm gonna pick up my focal point, and it is going to be the door and wisteria. So I'm gonna start with that focal point and then just basically draw everything around it. Also, my sketch is not going to be so detailed as later on my inking. I just do want to place everything and just to make it in a scale. It will definitely make it easier later on the sketching part. So not all the details are going to be done, but just those things, objects that I do want to know where I'm going to place later on. Also, I do, as I mentioned earlier, go back and forward, erase if I make any mistake, correct them. I do like to have that freedom to do that. Also, for the wisteria, I'm not gonna draw every single detail, petal and flower. I'm just again placing it to know where I'm gonna put everything. And some simple bushes around my doors and stairs. And not everything needs to be detailed. Just choose your focal point and then go around it and choose what you want to draw in a little bit more details and what you want to just make an impression about. When I finished with my sketch, I'm just transferring it to my watercolor paper, and for that, I'm using a graphite paper, but of course you can use a window. If you're using a single sheet of paper, I'm using a block, so graphite paper makes it easier. Also, I used a pencil in color, so I can see what I've already traced and what I haven't, because I have painted, draw with my pencil. And when finished with that, next step is going to be painting in watercolors my wisteria. And here is the step that you can just switch. You can first ink and then later on paint in watercolors. I am gonna use ink that is water soluble, so that wouldn't be smart. But also I wouldn't advise you to do the inking first, because when you do your watercolors, it will be a lot easier to know what you have covered with your wisteria and what you should ink and what you shouldn't ink, if that makes any sense. because if you would ink first and then later on paint, you might go on top of things that you inked, and maybe you're gonna put ink on the entire window and then later cover it with wisteria. It wouldn't look believable if you put wisteria there but the entire window is visible. So I do advise you to do the watercolors first. I started with a lighter wash on top and a little bit darker on the bottom, because the light is catching the upper part of the flowers and the lower part are a little bit in the shadow, so also a bit darker. And for wisteria, I have used Quinacridone Rose, also some Indigo and Indanthrene Blue. And for the trunk, I have used raw sienna, burnt sienna, and a little bit of the sepia. So just now that the paint slightly dried, I'm adding a little bit more of the darker shade on the bottom, where I do want to make it look like it's in shadow. For a couple of foliage leaves, I'm using some olive green and a little bit of the green. Just going in between my wisteria and adding some foliage. Also, I will finish off my watercolors with a couple of splatters just to make it a little bit looser. Same mix of colors that I did use for my wisteria. And I do want to cover some parts. I don't want to splatter all around. And next step is going to be inking. So just make sure that your watercolors are completely dry before you start to ink. So I do want to make my lines, I guess, not so clean and clear. I do want to make them a little bit sketchy and embellished, especially in the corners, just adding a little bit more ink there. And also adding a little bit more of the details. As I mentioned earlier, I did not do all the details in the sketch, but now that I started my inking, I will be adding a little bit more of the details. Sketchy lines also for the tree trunk on the left side, doors, and since my ink is water soluble, I will do later on some shading with just a clean water. And now that I'm moving on to my stairs, you can see that on my sketch those stairs were very simply done. I just made a placement, just placed it. But now with my ink, I'm adding a bit more details, making it look like a stone stairs. If it is easier for you, you can just also do this when sketching. But I guess I did not find that necessary. Also for the bushes, I'm gonna make them quite loose and not bother myself with the details. One more thing that I did not do in sketch is this stone bricks or stones for the building on the wall. I'm adding that now to make it a little bit more interesting, but not all the way. I'm not drawing every single stone or brick, just some of them, hinting that they're there. And you can see that my sketch is a lot more detail in the center part where the doors and stairs are, and a lot looser on left and right side. I just want to put it there but not go overboard with that. Also, I've added some ink to the wisteria, and now I'm using just water. It's not really clean. It still has paint from my wisteria, which is fine. And as mentioned earlier, my ink is water soluble, so I'm just moving it with water, but if you are using waterproof ink, you can use here watercolors. So maybe mix of Payne's gray and some Quinacridone rose and blue to make it slightly purple, grayish purple, when adding those details. Also, now I don't want to go overboard, just want to actually paint the shadows and not every single detail with this water. Quite loose on the sides, a little bit more detail in the central part. And now just also adding water to Wisteria. I've added some ink there, so now that we're adding water, that ink is bleeding and creating those darkest shadows. Last thing, I'm gonna add a couple of more splatters in violet and also in green. And with that, we will be finishing off all of our steps into this urban sketching. If you like, you can add watercolors also to the other parts, but I did want to paint only Wisteria, everything else leave in ink. Hopefully guys, you enjoyed this video and this painting process. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you haven't still, please do subscribe to my channel. I have many tutorials there. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you next time. Bye!